He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
This one's wife. What do we learn from Harry talking to Nato? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Well, Harry has resurfaced. With there being speculation as to where he might have disappeared to, he has popped up. And he's popped up on the big screen, doing an impression of a Bond villain, talking to his underlings. Ordinarily, that Bond villain might be asking questions about how is our influence in the presidential election in the United States progressing? Have we taken over Southeast Asia yet? One could imagine that with Harry, it would be, can you hear me, guys? Yeah, can you hear me? Not sure. How does this thing work again? Okay, hi, guys, yeah. Before we begin, does anybody know where I can get some really good green and blue crayons? Yeah, Megsy's melted them again. Bit disappointed about that, you know. But Harry has appeared on the big screen, and he did so as a consequence of having a video call with the military committee with members of NATO at NATO headquarters. There are two interesting questions that immediately arise from this, namely, where was he? The suggestion was that he was actually at Monty Shit Show, and also what's going on with the picture in the background. But I'm going to address those points in separate videos because they merit their own discussions. Now, there was some suggestion on social media that this was actually an historic event that had taken place back in September and that it had only been released now, or that Harry was appearing as part of a recorded message. But the reports that have followed in mainstream media and also NATO's own information suggest that any speculation that this was a recorded event or historic is inaccurate. Indeed, NATO on their own site stated, on the 30th of October 2024, the Invictus Games Foundation briefed the NATO Military Committee at NATO headquarters on the role of Invictus in supporting wounded, injured, and sick service members and veterans. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, addressed the military committee via VTC, with the delegation attending the meeting in person. The delegation included Dominic Reid, Chief Executive of Invictus, Lord Allen, Chancellor of the Board of Trustees, and Richard Smith, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer. Now, it's interesting that Harry didn't appear in person whilst his Chief Executive did. Why was it that he chose to appear via video message rather than going there in person? I'd also seen it suggested that actually this whole event was fake, premised on the basis that Dominic Reid had resigned as being Chief Executive of Invictus, so how on earth could he have attended this meeting? Well, that's easily addressed. He resigned in July. He didn't leave Invictus in July, and it's quite common when you are holding a position of employment with an organisation that, unless otherwise agreed, you serve a period of notice. And particularly if you hold the position of a chief executive, your notice period could be anything from between 3 months to even a year. I suspect that Mr. Reid will remain in post for at least around 6 months, of which we're only halfway through since his resignation, and that's why he was there. Thus, the suggestion that he'd left, and therefore somehow this meeting was fake, was baseless speculation. Harry appears on video screen, his chief executive is there, and the delegation briefed the military committee on the breadth and development of the Invictus programme and the progress it is making to expand the scope of its mission. The core purpose of Invictus is to support the recovery and rehabilitation of wounded, injured and sick service members through sport and adventure. The Invictus Games Foundation is working to continue establishing a global community where rehabilitation and recovery are better enabled and understood. This is primarily through the delivery of the Invictus Games, taking place in different host cities every 2 years around the globe, but also through a multi-layered programme beyond the Games, which aims to build a network amongst global wounded, injured and sick veterans and promote advocacy of Invictus. Meeting with representatives of the Invictus Games Foundation provided a platform for the NATO Military Committee to explore and learn how allied nations can establish or develop a relationship with the Invictus Games. Admiral Bauer emphasised the importance of protecting allied wounded servicemen and women, veterans and their families. He highlighted the invaluable support and hope the Invictus Games Foundation provides to the unconquerable souls of inspirational wounded, injured and sick service members and veterans. I believe the work of the Invictus Games Foundation to be very important, and it strikes at the heart of our shared values as military personnel. Admiral Bauer conveyed the power of the Invictus Games Foundation in reaching far beyond the games themselves, changing and sometimes even saving the lives of both the wounded soldiers and their families. Today, this was 30th of October, today's military committee session follows up a meeting between the chair of the military committee, Admiral Rob Bauer, and Prince Harry in May 2024, where Admiral Bauer attended a service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. So it would appear that Admiral Bauer and Harry had a chat, and that Admiral Bauer is on board with the principles of Invictus and may well have invited Harry to put forward some of his observations. It's an interesting choice because one should imagine that Dominic Reid would be able to convey what needed to be conveyed, and that you'd have to also take into account the lack of credibility that Prince Harry has these days as a consequence of his own behaviours and, as of course, as has been made clear on so many occasions, the association with his wife. Other than the fact that she appeared in a photograph behind him, more about that separately as I've mentioned, it's slightly surprising that she didn't walk in part way through and go, "Oh, hello everybody, I'm here too," and launch into a fridge magnet platitude beige word salad speech, whereby, demonstrating that she can't read the room, she attempts to take over. You might scoff, but it's certainly not beyond the realms of comprehension that she would engage in such behaviour. Remember, as a narcissist, she needs to make it all about her. She experiences no shame. She would barge in. You've seen a number of occasions where she sought to take things over. She's elbowed Harry out of the way, interfered in his handshake by hugging somebody. And we've also seen that she's got form when it comes to the Invictus Games. Remember her behaviours at Dusseldorf, The Hague and Whistler? The way that she took over at Whistler, staring down the lens, as aforementioned, interrupting that handshake. The way that at Dusseldorf she engaged in that moment of stolen valour with her disgusting behaviour, marching in front of veterans. Thus, she's no respecter of the organisation. It's simply utilised as an extension of her. Remember, Harry is an extension of her. He's bolted onto her, along with his character traits, etc. And therefore the fact that the Invictus Games is his means that in her subconscious it becomes hers. As it was, she didn't interfere on this occasion, which is interesting. Ordinarily, she might do so. And thus we have Harry going solo again. Was he really the best person to provide the briefing? I suspect not. As I mentioned, I think that there are probably more articulate individuals that could convey what needs to be done. And it's evident that this was about getting money from NATO to sponsor the Invictus Games. NATO would be well versed, given that it's a military organisation involving several allied nations, of the impact upon wounded, injured and sick service members and veterans. Would also be fully familiar with the support that is required. They might not know the ins and outs of what the Invictus Games do, but I don't think that the Prince of Pink Pancakes is necessarily going to add anything especially meaningful in the presentation. Thus, I find it interesting that he was involved. I also think he didn't look particularly well in what was seen. And it's also interesting, so far, we haven't actually heard what he had to say. There was a quote on the NATO site from Admiral Bauer as to his observations about it, but clearly whatever Prince Harry had to say wasn't that meaningful, as it's not been quoted on NATO's own site, nor has it been quoted in the mainstream media. I'm surprised that Sussex.com or Invictus Games haven't pumped out a press release, providing us with the words of wisdom that Harry issued. But so far, it's not been reported on. I do believe that this was about them seeking funding to support the organisation. Do you agree? Do you think that's what it was all about? But also, what do we draw from the fact that Harry has reappeared? Is this a legitimate appearance? Is this stage managed? Is it part about an ongoing dance to try and demonstrate there is a professional separation between the two, but all else is well? Or might you see this as further grist to the mill, that there is actually both a professional and personal separation between Prince Harry and his handler, or might that now be former handler? Do you think that that's what's actually happened here, that he is once again demonstrating that he's striking out on his own, that he doesn't need to have her involved? These questions also segue into querying, was he actually at home? As I mentioned, I'll be tackling that in a forthcoming video, because there are certain key questions that might suggest that he wasn't actually there at all. Accordingly, we learn from this that whatever Harry had to say, it wasn't that meaningful, because it hasn't been reported on. We learn that it's likely that he's been shilling for money. We learn that it was probably unnecessary for him to be involved, that there are other individuals that would be able to convey the aims of Invictus more effectively. We also learned that this is another instance whereby he's wanting to demonstrate that he is capable of doing things on his own without this one's wife, and that either reinforces the professional separation and possibly might also emphasise that there is a personal separation too, notwithstanding the backdrop that appeared in the video. What are your thoughts about the matter? Do you think that he was a useful ambassador to speak to NATO on behalf of Invictus Games, or do you think that he has no credibility these days as a consequence of his own behaviours and that of his wife by association? Do you think that this was mainly about him demonstrating that he can do things on his own professionally without the influence of his wife, or do you think there's something deeper behind it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.